Hi, I'm Jonathan Stein, managing editor of Project Syndicate, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel today with very distinguished participants, talking about the media situation in Central Europe, and the media situation to some extent matches the political situation in Central Europe, where there has been sort of a rising tide of populism, nationalism, quasi-authoritarianism within the context of European Union membership. And many of the governments and governing styles that have emerged from Central Europe in recent years have really been a kind of provided a kind of template for authoritarian nationalist rulers elsewhere, and often very far afield or around the world. So without further ado, I'd like to get right into the discussion of how the media both reflects and reinforces that situation in Central Europe. At the far end of the panel is Silvie Lauder from the Czech weekly Respekt, which is one of the high quality weeklies, always with some of the best journalists in the Czech Republic, who usually either stay there or move on to other publications and other projects. But it's a magazine that has been around since the revolution. It was called Informační servis, the information service for the revolution, and then it became fairly quickly Respekt, and really a must-read for the country's political and professional elite. Unfortunately, Tomáš Bela from Slovakia fell ill and couldn't join us today. But his replacement on the panel, Beata Balogova, is just as good, and she is the editor-in-chief of SME, which is a leading Slovak daily, a Bratislava liberal daily that I used to read almost daily back in the 1990s when I was covering Slovakia for the Economist Intelligence Unit. And then directly to my right is Slawomir Sierakowski, who is well, he's everything in Poland. But he. Well, it doesn't sound actually so positive. But he leads an institute, and he works with the media, and he's a film star, and an all-around Renaissance man. And we're very fortunate at Project Syndicate also to have him as a monthly columnist who writes extremely perceptive and insightful columns about the situation in Poland and Central Europe, and how it fits into the context of European Union politics. So, without further ado, let me begin with Silvia and addressing the situation in the Czech Republic, and particularly the situation with media ownership and its relationship to politics, because the Czech Republic is somewhat unique in the region in that it has a prime minister who himself is an oligarch in the bad sense of the term, not a very pleasant fellow, and he owns much of the Czech media, which has, so this relationship between the media and politics in the Czech Republic is not mediated by anything. It's not a matter of cronies surrounding the leader. It is in fact the leader of the government who is in control of much of how the government itself is covered by the media. So Silvia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello everyone, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Of course, there are many similarities between the situation in the Czech media landscape and generally many other countries. such as that the politicians don't need the newspaper anymore as much as they used to. They use direct channels through which they communicate with the voters. And if you mention the Prime Minister Babiš, he's extremely skilled in this and is famous for his very, very long Facebook posts, which are written in this sort of informal way, and it starts with, "Hey guys, do you know what's up?" I'm not seriously like this. And so there are many, many similarities between what's going on in the Western world generally and in the Czech Republic. However, I'll jump to the specifically Czech situation. I can't really think about, maybe you can correct me, but I can't really think about any other country in the world currently where this would be, that would have such problems to such extent. And that's, as Jonathan said, the fact that the Prime Minister, the head of the government, is in fact, and that's an important part of the sentence to which I will later come back to, de facto, not the jure, but de facto owns quite large part of the media. To be precise, large part, I mean it's several radio stations, 2 important mainstream daily newspaper, plus the sort of the metro newspaper, which sometimes is overlooked in the portfolio. But I always stress out this part of the portfolio because it's everywhere in pretty much the same. It's the daily newspaper a lot of people pick up in the morning because it's for free on the way to work. So it's an important platform also to get information to people. And then, of course, the servers, again, which are highly popular. So the portfolio is quite large. However, it's illegal, of course, in my country to be a politician and own a media. We got that far with like some basic democratic principles. So after this law became to effect, Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Babiš, transferred all of his companies, but I will focus on the media. But that's another problem, of course. But I will focus on the media part of the companies. He transferred them into a trust fund, but the problem with this trust fund is that he still has a direct influence over those people who are actually. Now, I actually have to say I'm not sure about the correct terms in English, so excuse me for this if I'm not really naming the positions and the functions in the trust fund correctly. But to say it in a sort of like a popular words or terms, he makes decisions over the people who control the trust fund. And what's interesting is we now have it officially confirmed that this is a problem and he is actually breaking the law. What is a bit absurd, and it does sound like, not to be cliched, but it looks like something from Václav Havel's play or Kafka's book, is that this statement that the Prime Minister is breaking the law and is in conflict of interests still with his media company was delivered by a tiny municipal authority in a little village near Prague, where the Prime Minister has his own permanent address. And the story was following. Transparency International, the organization, was worried and was concerned about the fact that they looked into how this trust fund is functioning, and they thought this is a problem. This should be addressed. And they look into the law, which states that the conflict of interest and the members of the government cannot own media, and they realized that this question can be examined by a municipal authority where the person in concern, or the person which we're interested in, actually has a permanent address. So it's a slightly absurd situation where people from a municipal authority, who usually look into things like if you drive too quickly with your car, or you haven't paid for your dog, or really very everyday little problems, looked into such a broad and important and really important question. Of course, it has another level of this, that how people who are not in the spotlight in any sense of the word all of a sudden had such great pressure on them and a great responsibility. They delivered a decision, however, just a few weeks ago, And it was, according to the opinions of many, including some lawyers, it was done in a proper fashion, in a proper way. And what they said was, yes, Mr. Babiš still has influence over the trust fund because he decides if those people who are now in the trust fund can be replaced. He does have a direct influence over them. Plus, there's the one tiny, cute detail about the trustees or the people in the trust fund, that one of them is his wife. So that also brings us an interesting situation. The case is not closed. It's ongoing, and it's a matter of debate, of course, in the Czech Republic. But to be fair, they also looked into whether Mr. Babiš actually uses this influence to actually influence how the newspapers write about him or generally about topics. And these people at the municipal authority looked into them. They actually asked opposition parties, which was quite interesting way how to do it, and asked various sources. And they claim they hadn't found evidence of that he would be actually influencing the newspapers. I slightly disagree with this statement because there are some even like a hard proof of his trying to influence his media, and simply looking at how mainly the newspapers cover certain scandals surrounding him is you can see that everyone else has it on the front page and really focuses on such, and there's so many things, I can name many of the scandals, really have it on the front page and really focus it on his media. They have it on page 4 or 5, and it's like a little article in the back. So you can see that there is not so much they would write for him or defend him directly, but it's the matter of focus, how much they put focus on how much it's important for them. And just one last sentence, and then I will end it there. I was recently having this debate with some university students, and one of them asked me a question, said, how is it possible that what used to happen when there was a scandal in the government, there was this massive, and he called it campaign of the media, covering the scandal and really digging into it and looking into it. And now it feels like it's not the case anymore. And I was thinking about what's the reason, and the reason simply is that really important part of the media who used to do these campaigns, so to speak, who uncovered these scandals, just simply don't do it anymore. And now we can ask ourselves why, and one of the theories and one of the reasons could be that they simply don't do it because they're owned by the target of the potential investigation and the focus as a journalist. So this really influences the whole media landscape in the Czech Republic, and of course not only just the media themselves, but the general conversation about important topics and so on. So I will leave it there.
Okay. And the situation in Slovakia, as I understand it, is there are similarities, but it's different, I think, in the sense that this kind of political control of the media is mediated by private owners that are allied with those with political power. Beata, can you speak to the situation, and particularly the situation with your own newspaper, SME?
Maybe I would start with a comment that for an observer it would seem that conditions for Slovak media and press freedom are quite fatal in Slovakia, because we have Viktor Orbán in our neighborhood serving endless inspiration for politicians around the region. And he has already served that inspiration to Robert Fico, who is still the most powerful person in politics, and he really has named free and critical media as the biggest enemy of democracy in Slovakia. Then we have a very toxic oligarchy group who has not finished yet his shopping rage among media. They are building their media empire. And then we also have the state, which doesn't want to take its hands off from the public broadcaster. And it seems that this is really a bad combination. But in Slovakia, there are good and hopeful stories. And I would mention the combination of Daily SME and the Daily Deník N, because the result of the Penta, the hostile oligarch Penta, making an entry to Petit Press.
Penta is a bank, as I understand.
It's they are an investment group,
an
and they are
investment group
active in
company,
essentially almost all spheres of the society. They are
Right.
huge, and they have their fingerprints almost everywhere. Just to describe who we are talking about, the head of the investment group had a very intense communication with Marian Kočner, who is the person who has been charged with the murder, ordering the murder of Jan Kuciak, the journalist. Penta has financed most of his dirty businesses. Then the Penta manager and head Jaroslav Haščák was indicated in massive political corruption. And it is, one doesn't have to be a media analyst to see that it's impossible for a investment group with such profile to be a responsible media owner. But they miscalculated the situation, because their entry to Petit Press resulted in actually 2 critical news outlets. Deník N today is quite an influential news outlet. They are breaking important stories about corruption, and they serve and they perform the role of controlling the government. I entered the Daily SME at the time when a large part of the newsroom was leaving, and I took on this almost impossible role of keeping SME independent. Today, 4 years on, I can say that SME is a critical, independent media. So it's a bad news for the oligarch, because instead of 1 critical media, now they have unintentionally produced 2. But the story doesn't end here, because now we see that their influence, let's say in Weekly Trend, which is a very good economic weekly, is as such that the weekly might just fall apart, because journalists feel that they either morally and also professionally cannot just do their work under such control. And for example, in Petit Press, they have a minority ownership, less than 40% now, 39%, but they have 100% ownership in many other media. And part of the media they own, they have became similar to some of the conspiracy websites, which I would add to the landscape of why it might seem fatal, because in the region we have a very vivid conspiracy mindset,
Yeah.
and also the landscape of this media, and the readership is sometimes confused what is journalism and what is no longer journalism. And to add to this image and picture, I would mention just one example, that the government is now trying to reintroduce the right of reply for politicians, which already 10 years ago was doomed by OSCE as a very undemocratic legislation. And again, now they are reaching for the same legislation, because they feel that politicians don't have enough tools and enough means to communicate with the public, which is nonsense. And just to explain the context in which they want to make this change is that after the murder of Jan Kuciak, the political representation said that we want to make changes that would ensure more protection for journalists and more protection for sources. And here we go. That's they were capable of producing, wanting to return the right of reply for politicians, which would mean that any politician, if they feel that a story harmed their dignity, can request a reply, which the media, under threat of fines, would be obliged to publish. Maybe to add one more comment about the fact that outlets such as Deník and Aktuality, the home of Jan Kuciak, and the Deník SME, we also have to fulfill a public service role, because the public service media is no longer fully performing this role, and the public service television is now under political influences, and if we look at the history of this institution, that over the past 25 or so years, they had more than 15 general directors. So with every change of the government, there were changes made to the management of the public service institution. So basically, these still free and democratic media try to perform also this role, and while trying to survive. For Deník, it means that they use a model of readership-paid, readership-supported financing, which seems working very well for them. SME, we are schizophrenic in a little, because we are also using paywall, but we still also use online advertisement to support our functioning, which Penta makes our life even more difficult in this, because we understand that we have to make finances for our own existence, because we don't want Penta investments in our bloodstream. And so we understand that our freedom reaches as far as we are able to make money for our own operation. But back to the situation in the Slovak television and Slovak radio, it's very unfortunate, because there was a brief period of hopeful revival of the public service broadcaster, but now they again relapsed to times when I will just mention one example, that last year, on the heels of murdering Jan Kuciak, there were massive protests in the streets, tens of thousands of people, and there were occasions when the television completely ignored that.
Could you just briefly describe this case? Maybe, I don't think people are familiar. This was one of the only cases recently of an actual murder of a journalist in Central Europe. So if you could just
sure,
tell people what this was about and why it was important politically.
Jan Kuciak worked on stories that described how people using mafia methods were trying to influence the state, and how they were building an alternative state in the state. Marian Kočner, who we believe ordered his murder, had corrupted people in prosecution, in the police. He had links to high politicians. And basically, Jan Kuciak was covering some of his murky businesses, but he was also covering other explosive stories. For example, how 'Ndrangheta, an arm of the Italian mafia, actually also corrupted police in Slovakia. And Marian Kočner felt so protected in this country that he ordered murdering a journalist. And this really showed that the country is now sort of on the crossroads, because this murder revealed much more than just the fact that there was one person who wanted to get rid of a annoying journalist. It really revealed that part of the political representation was massively corrupted, that mafia methods were involved and incorporated how European funding was distributed, how state orders were approved, and how the prosecution and the police worked. And there was a massive response. So people went to the street, and it was very positive also for journalists, because suddenly we felt that support that people understood that yes, the murder of a journalist means a milestone, and it's a warning finger that something serious is going on.
And Fico stepped down.
Fico, and that was something like for 10 years, we as media were writing stories about corruption involving Smer party, and Fico was still there, and he was forced to step down, but he cannot forgive this to the media, and that's why he's attacking the media, and that's why he's trying to introduce this rhetoric that the media is actually paid by foreign forces and was trying to subvert the government, and this really again puts more and more pressure on the press in Slovakia.
Slawomir, you said something very interesting. You wanted to go last because despite the situation in Poland, which gets probably as much press or more than Hungary given its size, Poland is obviously the largest of the Visegrad countries, and under Jarosław Kaczynski and the Law and Justice Party, the same kind of dynamic has taken place. Yet you said that the media situation is not as bad as it is in Poland as it is in the Czech Republic and Slovakia. So why?
Well, of course, there are many reasons. First of all, the market is much bigger, the internal market. So it's much easier in Poland to run a newspaper. You have more readers just from the size of population. And actually, we in 90s, the largest Polish newspaper, Gazeta Wyborcza, was stronger than, I would say, I mean, at least it was the perception of people was that Gazeta Wyborcza is stronger than any ruling party. So the editor-in-chief was called vice president because like all important politicians used to go. Of course, he had huge moral authority because he was one of the most brave oppositioners. I'm talking about Adam Michnik, intellectual star, and someone with like very, very attractive personality. So like he was a king, really, like a intellectual sultan of Poland. And and then we had, probably in Poland we had, as you know, shock therapy, like very, very neoliberal transition. I'm a left-wing person, but I must say that what saved Polish media was the market, or like free market. We have very strong private media, private TVs and private newspapers, weeklies, etc. And although it was easy for Kaczynski to take over bluntly to take over public TV, public broadcasters, radio. Now this is the only country where they are subordinated to the government directly. Minister of Treasury is like the official owner of, or represents controls openly the public media, and actually the director of public TV used to run campaigns and is called bull terrier of peace. This is why, because he was like very, very radical when it comes to running campaigns for peace. So Kaczynski has no reservations. He runs media there are much like. Aleksander Kwaśniewski, the former president and a former communist, a liberal but communist, told me that if communist media would look like the media that we have, the present media, they would be fired for such a stupid propaganda. Because it's so blunt, it's so open, and it's so radical. So like 90% of time goes to peace, the rest goes to other parties, and they have a dilemma. Like, should we go, shouldn't we go? Because like on one hand, we legitimize what's going on the other hand, we're losing the access to the certain people that don't watch only public media. But they are much weaker once peace took over them, they lost probably the half or at least 1/3 of viewers. So they had 3 million, now they have 2 million, or sometimes even less. Still, no one knows if it's efficient or not. This way of propaganda, because peace is doing quite good in public in opinion polls. Okay, but when you said that I said that the situation is good, I meant the fact that out of 4 large TVs, 2 channels that are the largest are private and used to be very, very critical to Kaczynski. Out of 5 dailies, 5 are free and very critical. In Poland, tertium non datum. Either you are very, very pro-governmental or very, very critical. People are such against each other, like 2 camps, more than probably Hamas and Netanyahu. Like really, they are really, really like the war. They don't treat one another as adversary. Both treat each other as enemies of the country. This is why we don't have this liberal democracy conflict inside democracy. It's outside. So both treat the other side as an enemy of democracy, not as an enemy of party. So changing power would be the end of the country for peace, and Tusk is perceived as a savior. Actually, this is why Tusk is interested in the position of president, because he could be a president of Europe, but there is one higher position than this that he did not get yet. It's a savior of Poland, like Wałęsa was and Piłsudski before. This is why it could be attractive to him to come back and to come back to Polish politics. And out of 4 largest weeklies, the largest and the second largest is free and very critical. Largest 2 portals that in the same time are the largest Polish media are, of course, all of them are private, the media that are free and critical. So out of 2 biggest, 2 are large and critical. So Kaczynski used to say that only 2% of media belongs to his camp, which is not true, but I would say 1/3 Kaczynski controls, or 20% he controls, the rest he doesn't control and he has against him. This is why I would say that the situation is very, we still have free public debate. It's not a problem to have an access to the people, to have an access to media, etc. And they don't have reservations. Actually, we have very strong investigative journalism. Even the most commercial media, they care very much about investigative journalism, because probably it's the most expensive journalism. You have to work on one case for a year, you need 15 people, you need really a lot of money, etc. So it's really, really expensive, and still the commercial media, they do it, and it's kind of the most prestigious thing to have. They reveal scandal after scandal. Now it's like everyday new scandal. So I would say that from this point of view, the situation is good. We have this people used to juxtapose Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. There are certain reasons for this, but actually these 4 countries are very, very different. And this region is probably more disintegrated than any other region in Europe. On the other hand, it's quite important, just to give you one example. The largest trade partner for Germany, the largest economy, is not France, China, or USA, it's this region. And it's twice as large as France, for example. And also the growth between Germany and Visegrad countries is 9% annually. And the growth between France and Germany is 0.6 if I have correct data. So this is why Germany would never leave this region, because they are doing really good money here. They are making they are doing good business here. This is why if you ask yourself why Orban is so much accepted, or he had to do 10 years of this like radical populism to be suspended. Okay, not even, you know, not expelled after anti-Semitic campaigns, closing university, etc. It's because some kind of appeasement, like soft appeasement policy towards the region. Kaczynski also is quite like, I would say, he's not criticized even in Germany, like openly, at least by not by Merkel or like the ministers. They used to even say, well, sometimes we are too arrogant to Poles. This is why. This is how they justify the fact that they are not reacting to what Kaczynski or Orban is doing. But there are also other reasons. Like Hungary plays a role of like if Turkey stops refugees that would come to Europe, Hungary plays this role for Germany. Like the role of Turkey for entire Europe, Hungary plays this role for Bavaria. Because like 90% of refugees used to go through Hungary. So like this is why like the Bavarian party, CSU, and without CSU you will not have government because CDU is not strong enough to build a government. This is like why like CSU politicians used to, like Manfred Weber, the Spitzenkandidat, used to say that in Hungary, Orban built civic conservatism, and his great friend. He always congratulates whenever Orban wins election.
I think there is much more pressure on EPP now. And
True, but
if I can just react with one thought, that what you are saying is, of course, the business side and some of the political calculations, but there is also the fact that Orban and now helped with some Polish politicians are trying to kidnap Visegrad in terms of building a new identity, which it would be still viewed as European, but they are like constructing a very false European identity. And I think that's why critical media is so crucial.
Of course.
And in stressing how perverse is this effort to somehow go back to roots and creating false history, redefining history, and then saying that Visegrad will save the real European identity.
Of course. The last point when it comes to media specifically is that Poland is, if I'm correct, also I checked the data, the least corrupted country, surprisingly, in entire Eastern Europe. It's like 30th on the list. Hungary is like 64th, and we don't have strong oligarchs. We have some kind of petty oligarchy, and actually the role of oligarchs is played, or at least Kaczynski would like to play the role of oligarchs. What I mean is that if the state controls one big bank or two big banks, he would like these banks to buy like large TV, large newspaper, but then usually they are either American or German, and they don't want to sell it to Kaczynski. Like Axel Springer plays. It's kind of a penance to what happened in '68 or before. Axel Springer plays a role of defender of free debate in Poland.
That's why we missed them so much, that they left, that we were sorry that they left.
So they don't want to repeat the mistake. They don't want to repeat what happened in Hungary. So they don't want to go. But actually they are doing, the business is good for them in Poland. We had even the situation when actually what was to be, what was for sale was large Polish radio broadcaster, and it was owned by Czech company, and Czech company sold it to Gazeta Wyborcza, not to right-wing journalists. And what is funny is that actually Soros plays a role of someone who helps Polish media.
Doesn't he play a role in everything?
No, but no. But actually, I would say that if I'm correct me if I'm wrong. He does not play any role at least today, in media in Visegrad countries, where he's so strongly attacked in Hungary, in Slovakia, even I think sometimes in Czech Republic. He's not attacked in Poland somehow. He doesn't play a role, like he's not important somehow, but only in Poland he is really like trying to help. Like Gazeta Wyborcza, 10% of Gazeta Wyborcza is owned by Soros. He bought the shares to help Gazeta Wyborcza when they were in a deep crisis.
But I think, like, just again, one comment. I think Soros is not attacked for any objective things. It's a way of
course,
you know,
imagined.
it has nothing to do with any real influence or he was created as a prototype of enemy to end any critical discussion in Hungary. So whenever Soros is used, you can freely insert the word Jew, you can insert the word migrant, foreigner, and
a rootless cosmopolitan. So somebody who does not accept nationalism. And in fact, he's attacked very much by the Netanyahu government, which has actually allied with Orban in Hungary in attacking Soros, right?
But like my last point, the fact that it's imagined wouldn't be a problem in Poland. We have anti-Semitism without Jews, we have anti-communism without communists, we have anti-refugee ideology without refugees, so believe me, like, we are a very talented nation. Wouldn't be a problem.
I think all our nations are very talented in this sense, but I'm repeatedly called the Soros journalist, so yeah. I'm very much aware of it. But there are a few bits of reality in this, for instance, that we are supported through, for instance, Open Society Fund, and we are, you know, so that it's not entirely fictional that I mean, not directly his influence, but just through his general activities that support democratic discussion and free press, that it's, yeah, I'm not defending the fake news conspiracy theory.
Project Syndicate grew out of a project that was funded by George Soros.
There you go.
And I can tell you, you know, one of my colleagues, Roman Friedman, who is a founder of Project Syndicate, has been friends with Soros since the mid-1980s. And Soros asked him to help set up the economics department at Central European University, which was then in Prague in the early 90s. And Project Syndicate grew out of that research project that they were doing together called the Privatization Project. And I can tell you that though Soros has remained a friend and supporter of Project Syndicate, there has never been one instance where he has tried to exert any kind of influence over what we've covered or how we've covered it or who we invite to write for us. I mean, he has been absolutely hands off. What he supports is the ethos of a liberal, open civic debate within the broad confines of democracy. But we have people who are very left-wing, we have people who are very right-wing writing for us, and that is the purpose. I mean, he takes this idea, not to be a Soros fanboy, but he takes this idea of an open society very seriously, and that is reflected in his investments and his involvement in Central Europe. The problem is that worldview of an open society runs against some very strong populist nationalist currents in Central Europe and around the world. So he is seen as an enemy of this idea of a nation, an ethnic nation, as a kind of a closed group that has to focus only on its own survival, and which is a very, very, very powerful sentiment in a place like Central Europe, where these are small nations that have been invaded and colonized, for many, many years. That's a history that's very familiar to people, that people it's almost, in Hungary, it's like the Treaty of Trianon, which reduced Hungary's size by 2/3. It's like it happened yesterday, and it happened in 1920. I'm sorry for hogging the floor.
Just one comment.
Yeah.
If he is attacked anyway, he can like openly support now everything, because you cannot punish someone twice
Yeah.
for the same thing.
No, but I think my point was that it's no longer this sophisticated debate what he does. It's he is used as an appeal to the basis instinct of masses.
Sure.
I will just say one short example. When the Freedom House downgraded the democracy rating of Hungary, Viktor Orbán made one sentence response. This organization is financed by Soros. And that was the end of any debate. There was no other comment. And that's how he killed any critical debate. Because if anyone joins the critical discussion, they are discharged as Soros fan, and that's why I mentioned that that's very dangerous. And they no longer say this sophisticated explanation. They don't even know who Soros is. They just have in their head this amorph image of someone who is Jewish and someone who is the evil.
Yeah. You know, one of the things, and you know, we've sort of touched on it. I think Slawomir kind of opened this conversation, and it's always struck me as a paradox that these small countries, in order to succeed, and to the extent that they have succeeded, it's because they are open economies. You have to be. If you're a small country, you're going to be reliant on trade, simply because your areas of comparative advantage are going to be relatively few. So you have to have an open trading regime and significant amounts of foreign investment. And in this too, Hungary was a pioneer. In the early 1990s, Hungary opened itself up to foreign investment and got more foreign investment than any country in the region. And this also happened eventually in Slovakia and in the Czech Republic, where, you know, the Škoda car plant, which I drive past every weekend when I go to my house, you know, it's 15% of the country's exports. It's owned by Volkswagen, and when you drive through this area, Mladá Boleslav, north of Prague, it used to be just the car factory. Now there's, you know, on the left-hand side. Now, and on the right-hand side, it used to be a huge open field. Now it's called the Škoda Parts Center, an even bigger factory. And all of the sub-suppliers are now localizing, and they're all in the vicinity of this factory, right? And there's another huge auto assembly plant east of Prague in Kolín, and it's the same in Slovakia, right? These have become auto car production centers, not only for Europe, but you know, much more broadly. You'll find Škoda cars in India, you know, for example, and it's the same in Poland. You know, significant amounts of foreign investment, yet at the same time, this kind of nationalist circling of the wagons, this reactionary populism that is that's motivated, fueled by a deep suspicion of foreigners. So I'd like to bring this back to the media and talk about how foreign ownership affects the media, what relations are like between governments and foreign owners, and between domestic owners and foreign media owners. Maybe you can start, Silvia.
Well, to be honest, we don't have many foreign owners left, actually.
Right.
I mean, now how you define owner? I mean, I forgot to mention that we have
take
to
us through
thank
the history
Slovakia
of that.
to producing and our prime minister. And there is a joke that we would like him to go back home, maybe sometime soon. But no, it's just you don't. They don't want him. We don't. Yeah, where should he go? Probably to France. He has some properties in France. He should maybe move there. But just Jonathan, what you have said, that just it reminds me how it was a heated discussion even in the 90s. I mean, we do feel now that the nationalism is on the rise, but if you look back, and when I remember the discussions, whether we should sold the national goal, so to speak, to the foreigners, you know, God forbid Americans, or, you know, it was very much present there. And for instance, I remember that Respekt, I wasn't working there because I was still in high school at the time, but I do remember that they supported privatization to the foreign hands, and they were severely attacked, that it should stay home and it should be privatized to the hands of the domestic hands. And it turned out the domestic way was the wrong one and the foreign way was the right one. But at the same time, it has, of course, a different consequences now, because if I may talk about the Czech economy and the focus on the automobile industry, there are some dangers. For instance, there was a study of which European countries are in most danger from the whole automatization and robotization process, and Czech Republic is one of them, because the economy focuses so much of functions and sort of activities that could be replaced by robots and artificial intelligence and so on. So it has its ups and downs. And just one last remark to what is fascinating in the long term to me, how a very, very open economy, as you said, and pro-export. I mean, we are export economy, and we absolutely need to be. It's our thing, the way how to survive and thrive in the world is to be part of the European Union. How this country, at the same time, be so Eurosceptic, even to a sense that you have members of parliament suggesting Czechsit. It even has its word, which is, I have to say, it scares. I want to say the sentence, but I won't say it. It scares the shit out of me. That's the sentence I wanted to say. Because when we see what's happening to Britain, which is a large country, which is a country with a longer history, which is a bigger country than the Czech Republic, I can't imagine what would happen to the Czech Republic. We would leave without no deal and no one would talk to us and it would be a disaster. However, these sentiments are still there. So just to tackle within, just to say a few remarks to the whole economic situation. And, regarding the media, I mean, there is... well, there are few. I wasn't really precise. There are few foreign owners. The TVs largely are owned by foreign companies. But I wouldn't say the actual. This doesn't really as much is a source of controversy in the Czech debate. I wouldn't say. I mean, there is a focus on we have enough, or the debate is focused enough on the controversial domestic owners, such as the owner of my magazine, for instance, or the publishing house, which is, again, one of the oligarchs. It's the third richest man in the Czech Republic. And he used to own mines, coal mines, in one of the poorer regions of the country. So the narrative is we're living of the blood of the workers. The workers, which they harvested, but they dig out the coal with their own hands, and we are the lazy Prague journalists that are living out of them, which of course is not true, but that's the narrative.
Beata, if you want to speak to this very quickly, because I'd like to have a couple of questions, if possible.
Just very briefly, I would stress that it is better to talk about traditional owners who understand the role of media rather than foreign owners, because we know that the Chinese are looking at the media environment, and I wouldn't say that this foreign owner is going to be a good balancing force in Central Europe. So yes, I mean, in Slovakia, Petit Press is owned by a traditional media owner who understands the role of the media. And I think that foreign ownership, the German ownership, is still important to maintain large media, which is able to reach outside of small bubbles. And we see that in Hungary, that's where the battle was lost. That in Hungary, except RTL Club, which is a German ownership, you don't have a large media which would be reaching outside Budapest, talking to the countryside. Right. And maybe that's important that we distinguish owners based on their approach to the media business.
Okay. What is the rating of RTL?
It's one of the biggest.
I'd just like to ask if there are if anybody has any questions. I feel like we've only left 4 minutes, but I would like to open it to questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, we can continue debating among ourselves. Nobody?
We're fine. We can just keep on going.
Well, so okay, so Slawomir, tell us about the German investment role in Poland, Axel Springer, and why has this benefited Polish media?
I think I already answered. I mean, they have a second largest weekly. They have the biggest tabloid. Actually, I didn't mention tabloids. We have 2 tabloids, and both are very critical to the government. One is maybe like, I mean, neutral in a sense that like it's attacking. Sometimes it's attacking opposition. Like they are they're democratic in this sense. Other than that, they, well, surprisingly, they're not afraid. And also, the other difference is that Kaczynski is extremely anti-popular in Poland, and always was. He would win the anti-ranking of the least popular politician, and also he's very different. He's like, you know, he's strange. He's not like Orban or Fico, like a normal guy, you know, like someone who would like play football, watch some, you know, matches, and talk to people in a friendly way or something. Like he's isolating himself. He's not president, not prime minister. You talk to Polish prime minister, Polish president, you never know, like it's like doesn't make sense or not, because the guy is not a decision maker. Usually he chooses like nobodies, like people without any personality to be a president or prime minister. So it really, I mean, strange.
It is a strange situation. Usually in a parliamentary democracy, the leader of the party that gets the most votes becomes the prime minister or takes a role in the government. He has absolutely no official government role, and you know,
and also no responsibility.
Right.
So like, you know, we will have a change of power, like all of them will go to prison, and Kaczynski will be, you know, a free, happy man. There is a certain corruption scandal now, so there is like paragraph for him as well. But like, you know, and you mentioned Trianon Treaty. Like actually the two most like opposite countries in this region is Hungary and Poland. Like for example, Poland is the least is the country that is least interested in changing borders. Poland would like we want to have stability in the region. Hungary is interested in changing borders. Like Hungary used to say, like Orban used to say, this is the only country that is neighboring itself. If you know what I mean, like, because Hungarians live, you know.
Yeah, the Treaty of Trianon took away Slovakia, which was northern Hungary, called Pozonia in Hungarian. Transylvania in Romania was also part of Hungary. Yeah. Vojvodina in northern Serbia, parts of Croatia. This was all part of Hungary, and it lost 2/3 of its territory after World War II. I actually wanted to just ask, but we only have about a minute left, so maybe...
But there is one question. Maybe.
Oh, you have a question, great.
No question. Okay.
No question. Okay, the barbarians are at the gate, unfortunately, and we're going to have to stop there. I hope that some of us at least can stay around for a few minutes and answer any questions that people have. We can talk informally. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.